Rushab is the founder of Think Business 360, a business accelerator. Rushab's going to talk about building a C-level mindset, a necessary skill for entrepreneurs. Rushab, we look forward to hearing your presentation. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that introduction. Thank you to the One Business World team, to Stelios and everyone here. And thank you, all of you, for taking the time to attend this session. You know, when we talk about entrepreneurship, we're all visionaries. Entrepreneurs love building things, love creating things. And unfortunately, we as entrepreneurs kind of hate doing the administrative stuff. We're kind of just running things, right? So the important part of this workshop is I wanted to talk about building this C-level mindset, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they jump into that visionary building and they sometimes forget that they need to be a C-level, whether it's CEO, COO, CTO, whatever it might be. I wanted to do something different in this session. I want all of you to walk away with something that you can actually implement. If you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a business, or you're already have an established one and you're growing it, I wanted to give you something in this session that you can walk away with. Before we get into that, there's a funny story I wanted to really just tell you about. And it was a time when I was laughed out of a room of venture capitalists. And if many of you who are entrepreneurs may one day be raising capital, and you'll be in front of VCs and investors. And I'm dating myself here, but this was back in 2001. I was a sophomore in college, and it was 5 quote unquote co-founders. And we came up with a concept, which today, if you walk into an airport and you'll see those iPads on the tables that you can order food from or play games, little like tablet kiosks. That was an idea we came up with in 2001, which was a decade before the iPad was released. We were ahead of our time, and that was the main reason those VCs laughed us out of the room. But why this session, this topic, building a C-level mindset, reminds me of that story is because it was 5 of us co-founders who all of us wanted to be a CEO. So we didn't define our roles. None of us knew what each other's skill sets were. So we didn't know each other's zone of genius. And we didn't look at this business in a way that I would today teach entrepreneurs or other business professionals. Real quickly, since we're short on time, I wanted to just introduce myself that I've been an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, for almost 20 years. And in that 20 years, I've owned or operated 8 companies. And they've spanned across 10 industries. Now, why that's important is because having multiple different industries means that you have to be able to grasp business in various complexities. And so I needed to figure a way out to be able to think about business in a way where no matter what industry I'm in, I can apply a generalized framework that I can grasp that business. And so that's what I ended up doing with my 8 businesses. And because I found a way to think about business, I ended up creating a framework behind it. And now business schools across the country, MBA programs, master's programs, for the past decade, bring me in to teach their business students how to think business. I also have workshops that hire me to do C-level leadership training to their executives, to their C-level team. Most recently, I did one at Forbes. And as Jeff had said during the introduction, I have an online business accelerator where I have business professionals, whether you're an entrepreneur or a working professional, who take online courses and go through my coaching programs in order to superpower their business mind. And one of the things, the big thing that you're going to take away today is how to think business. Let's just jump right into it, because I don't want to run short on time, and I want to make sure I give you an opportunity to ask questions if you have any. So basically, I wanted to talk real quickly about when you're building a C-level mindset, there are a few things that there are many success factors, but there are 4 that I wanted to highlight. Now, the 4 that you're going to see on this slide, we're not going to really talk about, but I wanted to just point it out there. The 5th one is what we're going to talk about. That's going to be on the next slide. And that's going to be what you're going to be able to take away today and implement in your business. To build a C-level mindset, you need mindset. And I got an opportunity to listen to some of the great presenters that have already spoken today. Hopefully, those of you that are in attendance are not Zoom fatigued yet. But a lot of dialogue was around mindset. A lot of dialogue was about how we have to think, optimism, positivity, but also mindset addresses those many of us who have fear of failure, limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome, things of that nature. Mindset is something that you're going to consistently work on throughout your entire journey. So it's important to really accept it today and then recognize it that that's something that you want to continuously work on. Another thing about building a C-level mindset is your drive and motivation. Now, what I'm going to say as someone who's had 20 years of experience is that if you get up and you're working on something, whether it's your own business or a project or anything of that nature, and you have to force and find every bit of energy inside of you to do something, that means you're lacking that drive and motivation. It's probably something you shouldn't be doing, or you're probably somewhere where you shouldn't be. So whatever you want to do, make sure you find that 1, 2, or 3 things that gives you that drive and motivation that makes you want to get up and do whatever you're working on. Now, you and your personality are definitely a reason of a success factor, and especially in order to create that C-level mindset. Who we are, we can change. And I think a lot of times I've come across people who are established entrepreneurs who are very hesitant to change. I know some of the speakers before have mentioned this, and I'm going to reiterate what they were saying, is that you have to continuously work on yourself. That means upskill, reskill, personal development, professional development, get mentors, join masterminds, take online courses, constantly invest in yourself. And that will be a resonator to success. And finally, on this slide, the knowledge you have, which is what you know, the skills you have, which is your talents, and the experience you have, which is what you've already done. Those are all underlying factors to getting to that C-level success factor. But what we're going to really lean on is what I actually created, which is what business schools bring me in, which is why corporations hire me, which is why I have people who take my coaching programs or hire my consulting. You're going to get an introduction onto what I call the Business 360 framework, and in a grander way of saying it, how we think business. So those of you who are young entrepreneurs or even established entrepreneurs or experienced entrepreneurs, wherever you are, I think a lot of us can relate to what you're going to see on this slide, which is most of us, when we think of our business, we think of it like this. It's one big block in our head, your business. And somewhere in that block is your product or service. And somewhere in that block is your customer support. Somewhere in that block is your operations and our operational cost. And basically all the other elements that you would consider are of your business. And it's just somewhere there. And whenever we need it, we kind of have to shuffle through a messy room in our head. So what I ended up doing was I decided that, let me take that block and let me organize it into buckets. Now, the reason I said let's organize it into buckets is because if you think about it, most things in this world, when we talk about productivity or getting organized, is in bucket form. So let me give you an example. Many of you have heard of Trello. Trello is a productivity organization tool that we use for our tasks, etc. And they're in bucket form. Everything you see in front of you are forms of buckets. When we think of our calendars, we think of it as in bucket form, right? Each day is its own bucket and we stay organized that way. Even bookshelves are forms of buckets because we stay organized with our books that way. And also these organizational totes, right? I'm sure many of you may have these around the house and you organize things in that. And essentially what we don't recognize when we see it every day, but is that having this way of creating buckets in our mind helps us connect the dots. So what I did is I took that block of business and I broke it into, as you saw in a few slides before, into 6 buckets. And if you think about, before I show you what those ingredients are, if you think about a recipe, if you're making food, for example, I make pancakes every Saturday for my kids. The recipe's real high level, I may miss 1 or 2 here, is egg, butter, milk, flour, sugar, baking powder. If you separate those ingredients on its own, they have their own characteristics. They taste different, they smell different, they feel different. Well, that's what I did with business. I separated the ingredients so that we can then connect the dots and think of our business in a more organized way. It gives us this high level, the C-level mindset. And so what I did is when I broke business down into its ingredients, I got what you see, these 6 categories in front of you. I call them the 6 board members of business. Now, I'm not going to mention each one right now, each board member, because the next exercise we're going to do, you're going to get familiar with them. But the reason I call them the 6 board members of business is because the board of directors are essentially the ones that are the highest level in a corporation, and then everything trickles down below them. If you ever need any guidance in your business, usually it's set by the board. The tone is set by the board. and how the company is going to run is set by the board. And every good boardroom hires their own CEO. So you have the 6 board members of business, and you have their own CEO customers. And essentially, you have 7 buckets, not 6 buckets. But this is how I broke business down. And what we did is we created buckets in our minds. So when I first came up with this concept and I started teaching this at business schools, I asked myself, how can I give that light bulb moment or that aha moment that can resonate for the audience? How does this help them think business? And before I jump into the next slide, I think I have someone on the chat here. Yes, someone's asking, will the slide deck be available after the session? I'm sure Jeff can answer that for us. And if it's not, I think there's a replay there, or definitely at the end of this, I'll give my contact information out and you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to provide any information. So coming back to this, I want to know how these 6 buckets can be an aha moment for the audience. And in order to think business, there's no better way to think business than to think like a shark. So what does that mean? Think like a shark. Well, for those of you from the United States, may be very familiar with a show called Shark Tank. And if you're not from the United States, I'll give you a quick introduction. Shark Tank is a very popular show here. The individuals you see in front of you are known as sharks. They are billionaire investors. And what they're doing is they're listening to entrepreneurs, such as yourself, pitching their idea to them. Now, these sharks are asking entrepreneurs systematic questions in order to determine if that entrepreneur's business is viable. And if the sharks feel it's viable, they are going to invest in that entrepreneur's idea. So the first thing that a shark wants to see, and it's not always a chronology, but this is the chronology I'm going to go with for argument's sake. The first thing that the shark wants to see is the product or service. They want to know what that product or service is, and then they're going to ask all these questions because they want to know everything about it. Then the shark is going to ask the entrepreneur, well, what was your goal when you came up with this idea? And how did you go about this idea? They want to know what the strategy was. They want to know that entrepreneur strategy. Around that time, the sharks are going to say, okay, now we know what the product is. We know what your strategy is or was. Tell us some numbers. How much is your revenues? What's the cost of running your business? The sharks want to know the profit structure. And when the sharks find out the numbers, the immediate question after that is, okay, if that's your revenue, then who is buying your product? Who are you selling to? Who are your customers? That's where our CEO floats in. The sharks then will ask the entrepreneurs, well, what's your leadership team look like? How many employees do you have? What's your sales strategy? What's your marketing strategy? If it's a physical product, what does your manufacturing, supply chain, and distribution look like? Do you have patents for this specific product? They want to know everything that falls under the operational functions of that company. Then the sharks will ask the entrepreneur, hey, you're asking us for $1 million. Well, how much did it cost you to at least launch your proof of concept? And where did you get that money from? Did you go to friends and family or an outside investor or a bank? They want to get a feel of the capital position. And finally, the sharks will say, well, what do you know about your market? What do you know about your industry? Who are your competitors? Is there anything that can impact your business, like the pandemic or the seasons? Are there any government regulations that can actually impact your business, maybe negatively or positively? Are there anybody in the outside, like investors, shareholders, creditors, lenders, that has some type of control on you on the outside that can impact your business on the inside? And why I use the word outside so many times is because that's the outside factors. Those are all those factors on the outside that can impact the business. And what the sharks basically did is they took all these, they basically took business and they organized in such a way where every time they ask a question, it fits in its own bucket. And so that they can then connect the dots on understanding the viability of that entire business. What you're seeing in front of you is that eagle-eyed view, the 30,000-foot view of business. Now, here's the interesting thing. What you see in front of you right now is just the first phase of the Business 360 framework. Now, because we're a little short on time, right? It's a 25, 30-minute slot I have with you. I'm not going to be able to dive into the full framework, but as a treat, I'm going to tease the framework, the full framework to you, where you're going to get a very quick introduction to it. So I called these guys the 6 board members of business. Well, if you talk about people, we all have our own characteristics. Well, it's no different to the board members of business. They have their own characteristics. So I expanded the framework and gave them their own characteristics. And I'm not going to go through each of these buckets, but still a one pager. And I'll just choose one board member. We'll choose profit structure. One of the characteristics of the profit structure is your revenue side. One is your cost side, and then maybe your financials, your financial history, your cash flows, et cetera. And I did that with each board member. And the reason why I did this one pager is actually to simplify how we can break our business down and then really dive into details of our business. In fact, entrepreneurs that I coach a lot of times use this template right in front of you as the starting point for their business plan. But guess what? This is not the full framework. And I don't want you to get overwhelmed on the next slide because we're not going to go through all of this, but I just want to show it to you. This is the full framework. All those buckets, those empty buckets actually now have details into it, right? So if you're an entrepreneur and you're starting your business, you're going to probably look at the product side. You're going to try to figure out what you're doing with your product, and you're going to say, okay, I have an idea what the product is. Then you may look at the customer side and say, who are going to be my customers? Who am I trying to sell this product to? Then you may jump out to the outside factors and say, okay, what's that market? Is it an oversaturated market? Are there a lot of competitors? Will there be demand? Is there anything like government policies or the economy that can maybe hurt my product that I have that I'm trying to launch? And then you may jump and say, well, what's my strategy? You may look at these areas of your strategy and you try to say, well, how am I going to go about doing it? Am I going to do it on my own? Am I going to partner with someone? Am I going to acquire another business out there? Then maybe you look at your operation, say, let me build my team. What's my marketing strategy? Once you have all this information, you're going to say, well, how much does it cost? And then if I have to raise capital, how am I going to go do it? And then finally, you can say, well, let me think about my revenues. What am I going to price my product at? What's it going to cost me to run the business? And I just did this in under a minute, like, what was it, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, where I just jumped on each side. And I said, if you're an entrepreneur, how are you going to try to think about starting a business? And I just gave you one model. So this is the benefit of the framework. This is why so many companies bring me in, so many business schools bring me in, and why when I do this on my online accelerator, it's so helpful. Now, coming back to the topic at hand, how does this framework help with the C-level mindset, right? We're saying that as you as entrepreneurs, you're visionary, but you still should be able to think like a CEO. Well, first, it gives you that 30,000 foot view. It gives you that big picture. Every CEO should be able to see the big picture. Second, I always hear this from entrepreneurs. It's hard for them to figure out strategies. Well, you just look at where you're trying to do. If you're trying to develop a new product, start with that bucket and then work your way through the framework. If you're trying to raise revenue or lower cost, start there and then work your way through the framework. Now you can devise strategy after strategy after strategy. And the great thing is when you create a strategy, then you can see how does that strategy impact other strategies in your business. You have to deep dive into those strategies. You can connect the dots. You can see what's happening in your business and try to figure out like, okay, well, if my revenues are down, let me connect the dots and find out why that they're down. Maybe I don't have enough customers, right? We jump to the customer board member. Maybe my marketing isn't good, which is under operational functions, right? So now you can start connecting the dots of why something is happening in your company and then where the problem may lie, which is a good transition to the next point, which is as a CEO, you have to be able to identify the red flags, and the framework can help you do that and thinking in that way. Or you can also identify opportunities, right? At the same time, now Apple, a month or two after the pandemic hit, had launched the iPhone SE. And there were articles written about whether that was a strategy of Apple's. They saw an opportunity. The pandemic hit. People were losing jobs. Well, let's introduce a lower cost option and sell a product in this market. So, you can also identify opportunities, and that's important as a CEO. You don't just identify what's not going right. You can also identify where you can do well. As I showed you, those buckets keep you organized, right? And I will be the first one to tell you that you need to have an organized mindset when you are being a leader in anything. And finally, the C-level mindset helps you create plans. It gives you a plan, gives you a direction. I always say the framework in itself, it's a tool. Don't just rely on the framework, but it is also a survival guide. It can give you direction. And so this was a high-level introduction to it. I wanted to make sure I stayed in time, which I think I did. I think I have some time to take questions and things of that nature. What I did for your convenience is I have a little barcode here, QR code, where you can scan with your phone and connect with me on LinkedIn. And Also, I have my LinkedIn URL there. But in the meantime, let me jump into the Q&A section and see what questions people may have. So we have a question from Mr. Krishnan. How is the 360-degree framework different from the business model canvas? Yeah, it's a great question. So if you look at the business model canvas, it talks about things like what's the word I'm looking for? It basically looks for the value of your product, right? Your value proposition, right? That's the word I was looking for, right? They want your value proposition. The business model canvas really gets you to think about the messaging behind your product, what you're trying to sell to your customer and how you're going to market it, and really just give you a model in that sense. The business 360 framework, which I created, was really just taking business and taking the accepted fundamentals, the components of business, and separating them. So how I created the business 360 framework, I had to actually, when I did my MBA, which is a little over 10 years ago, I had just sold a company. And I was looking to possibly go back into industry, and I was interviewing at consulting firms. I was interviewing at McKinsey and Oliver Wyman and Deloitte and places like that. And they have something called case interviews. And case interviews are business scenarios that the interviewer asks you, and you have to answer it in a very structured way. Now, in the consulting world, they call it MISI, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. And what that basically means is if I say, if I give an answer that, oh, we have to look at the product of the product, then we have to look at the strategy. And if I jump back to something in the product, I have now become redundant. I have become unorganized. So I read all these books on consulting and how to attack those interviews, and I felt like none of them spoke to me. So I created this framework using my experience in the entrepreneurial world, and I was able to separate them. So all of these buckets are actually exclusive from each other, mutually exclusive. But if you put them together, they're collectively exhaustive, right? And that's, again, a consulting term. So that's how it's different from the business model canvas. And for those of you that don't know, definitely search business model canvas and you'll get an idea of how that's more about value proposition and really just giving you an idea of how you want to message and market your product. And it's a great tool, the business model canvas. I have nothing negative to say about it. Mine is really just giving you a 30,000 foot or eagle-eyed view of business. So I hope that answered your question, Mr. Krishnan. Any other questions for anybody that's attended this? Hopefully this was something that gave you some insights on how you can be organized in the business world.
Shab, that was great. The looking at that chart, it's incredible when you put all that in. For any one entrepreneur to think that they can do all that, and if they can, that's a lot of talent there to be able to be good in all those areas. I can see why, when a venture capitalist looks for a team of people to cover so many of those different aspects. I wonder also, when you look at that, when you look at all those buckets and all the things that are in depth, whether you can also sort of take a look at that founder or the person who's kind of running the whole show, where their strengths and weaknesses might be, right? It gives them a really quick look at, maybe there's a way of highlighting to say, these are my strengths. And maybe you would assist them that way, Rushab, saying, hey, let's go over what areas you're strong in and where you might need some help, because it's probably very difficult to be really good at every one of those aspects.
No, I think that's a great point. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's funny enough, Jeff, when business schools bring me in to teach this to their students, they're not having me just teach it just for it's an extra resource. They actually have me teach it to them for them how they can land a job. And so what I do is I show them how they can use that framework and discover their superpowers. So talking about their strengths and their weaknesses, and I have an entire flow on that, workflow on that. And then when they're in an interview and a company asks them, well, why should we hire you? They actually, through that framework and through the workflow I created, they actually know how they impact a greater organization, what value they bring. I also teach them how they can use that framework or those buckets in your mind to network. If I were to say, hey, Jeff, how are you? My name is Rushab. You say, I'm Jeff. And I say, well, what do you do, Jeff? And if you tell me what you do, it's right away, I'm going to know the products or services that the industry you're in. The industry is the outside factors. I know the product side, maybe a little bit of operations. Now I can start relating myself to you and asking you questions. So absolutely. And on the VC side, which is very interesting, is more and more VCs today are hiring business coaches for their founders so that they can build this C-level mindset. Right. So they can have this way of looking as a C-level mindset. I'm working with a couple of VC firms on doing this for their founders and their startups. But yeah, it's great points. And I'm glad that you noticed that, because that's actually very true in this case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was great. And yeah, I wish we did have more time. But
Well,
that's how these things go. But Rushab, it was really a pleasure having you on. And again, I'm sure you'll get some people reaching out to you. I know I'd like to be in touch with you beyond this as well. And so I guess we will head back to the lobby shortly, and we'll have our 2 o'clock person. But again, thanks very much, Rushab.
sure. And if you'd like, I can put on the chat my LinkedIn and my website if anybody wants to just jump in. If we have a minute, I'll just do that. And so
Yes, we do. That would be great.
I put that there, and then let me just get my LinkedIn, and that way, if anybody wants to stay connected, that'd be great. And yeah, and
It's also a guide for a business plan in a way too, right? I mean,
Correct.
when you're putting your business plan together, so it's also a guide for that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I had mentioned that in the session. I said that the detail template, but when it's blank inside,
right.
yeah,
Right,
people
right.
they write bullets in that, and it's and if you ever watch Shark Tank, you could just use that and write bullets in there as well.
Yeah, and by the way, there is a Shark Tank in Mexico. And our earlier guest, Jose Luis, one of the people involved in Duke's Capitals, actually was a member of the Mexican Shark Tank. So that show is popular.
It is. No.
Okay.
Well, no, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much. So I'll take my leave here. It was great meeting all of you, and I've been jumping in the other sessions. I jumped them in the morning, a few of them, and they were great. So thank you for that.
Thanks for adding to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.